Good evening. I'm Neil Astley, editor of Bloodaxe Books, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce this launch reading for Mapping the Future, the complete poet, the complete works, an anthology edited by Nathalie Teitler and Karen McCarthy Woolf. In 2008, the level of poets of color published by major presses was less than 1%. By 2020, it was over 20%. And the complete works poetry, an initiative spearheaded by Booker Prize winner Bernardine Evaristo, whom we'll hear from in a minute, played a significant role in this change, supporting 30 poets from 2008 through to 2020. The complete works produced an unprecedented number of prize winners, including for the Forward Prizes. It was 3, but as of last night, it's now 5. T.S. Eliot Prize, 2, Ted Hughes Award, 2, Somerset Maugham Award, Dylan Thomas Prize, Rathbones Folio Prize, and Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year Award. The Complete Works Fellows have also gone on to judge every major poetry award and to take on significant roles in academia and translation, publishing over 40 collections. And the Complete Works has become the most successful collective ever formed in British poetry. Now, this anthology offers new or recent work by all 30 writers in the programme, as well as 10 essays on highly personal and politically engaged subjects, which redraw the map of British poetry by 10 of the 30 poets. Now, tonight's event is going to start off with Bernardine Evaristo is going to read a bit of her foreword to the anthology and talk a bit about the book. And then I'm going to hand over to Nathalie Teitler and ask her about the complete works, which she directed for all that time, and Karen McCarthy Woolf, who started off as one of the poets in the first cohort and edited then the second and third of the previous complete works anthologies that Bloodaxe published. And she is the co-editor of the anthology with Nathalie Teitler. After that, we've got live readings from Leo Boix, Edward Doegar, Will Harris, Nick Makoha, Denise Saul, and Karen McCarthy Woolf, reading poems from the anthology. And after them, we have 10 more poets reading a poem each who pre-recorded videos for us. So it's going to be a wonderful celebration of the poets of the complete works. And at the end of all that, we're going to all come together and have a discussion between the editors and the poets. So we're going to start off by having Bernardine Evaristo.
Hi, Bernardine Evaristo here. Just going to read you a short extract from my foreword, which kind of encapsulates what I want to say. Today, I'm so proud to see the writings of all 30 mentored poets filling the pages of this landmark anthology, and heartened to see that many more British poets of colour have emerged in recent times into a more receptive publishing climate than ever before. We're not there yet, but the developments thus far have been enormous and impactful. The projects, the lobbying, the speaking out seems to be paying off, for now. The cumulative achievements of so many of the complete works poets sends messages to new writers that a career in poetry can also be for them. There are no longer a few Black and Asian poets carving out careers, often seen as examples of exceptionalism, but we now have scores of poets employing the widest range of poetic styles and sensibilities and operating at every level of the literature sector. Furthermore, I'm increasingly impressed with the quality of the poetry being published today, as well as the intellectual interrogation of ideas around poetry in the essay format. This is demonstrated so admirably in Mapping the Future, framed by Karen McCarthy Woolf's brilliant and incisive preface. When I cast my mind back to the early 80s, when I first began to write poetry, there really was very little available to us wannabe Black and Asian British poets. No books, no support network, no guidance. Today's poets have structured schemes, workshops and courses available to them, and they can be inspired by the many poetry collections out there from previously overlooked communities. It is the ripple effect out to those for whom aspiration solidifies into ambition when they see that sustaining a career as a Black or Asian poet feels attainable. And I am so impressed with how today's new voices confidently handle poetic forms with dexterity and negotiate the slippery semantics and possibilities of language. The level of sophistication, even in debut collections, often astounds me. So it's amazing really to think that it's almost 20 years since I sat on the jury of the Next Generation Poets promotion, where 20 poets are chosen to represent the most interesting of the preceding 10 years, and no poets of colour were submitted initially. I caused a fuss, a few were submitted, one made the list. Wasn't good enough, was it? So then I initiated the free verse report with Spread the Word, and also the Complete Works mentoring scheme, initially with Spread the Word, and then it was taken over by Nathalie Teitler, who actually ran the scheme for 10 years. I think we really need to thank Nathalie for the way in which she led a scheme that was just so powerful in how it matched poets together so that they were mentored by people who were just right for them, the kind of networking that went on so that they were kind of included in the poetry sector in this country, and lots of other things such as writers' retreats and so on. And Nathalie was just amazing. She gave everything. She went above and beyond. And so please let us acknowledge what Nathalie did for this scheme, the Complete Works, 2007 to 2017. And actually, as I say in my piece, the ripple effect outwards. I'd also like to thank Neil Astley for publishing all the anthologies. He's always been such an incredible ally, and also for publishing this wonderful book. So happy to see it out there. Please, people, buy it. Give it as Christmas presents. It really is a landmark anthology, and this is a real cause for celebration.
Thank you, Bernardine. And here is the anthology. And we're now going to hear from Nathalie Teitler and Karen McCarthy Woolf, who are going to join me shortly. So we'll all be on screen together. You can come on.
Hello.
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 And do we have Nathalie?
Yes, I'm here. Okay, I just wanted to start by saying how much I enjoyed what Bernardine said, and I was very, very touched by her words. I think people have assumed that the Complete Works, I've heard it said that the Complete Works ran like a machine. And the idea seems to be that the poets didn't have to go through as much of a journey as they did. So I wanted to start by acknowledging that each and every one of these 30 poets put in an extraordinary amount of work, extraordinary amount of faith in the process, and really changed through it. So I would say it wasn't really me doing most of the work. I think I just created a space, or helped create a little space for them to do what they needed to do. I also wanted to say a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the scheme, because not everybody knows. Neil mentioned that there were 30 poets. So just to let people know that we had 3 rounds over those 10 years. And in each round, there was a national call out, and 10 poets were selected. Each poet was assigned a mentor, and they worked very closely one-on-one with the mentor. And they also had a series of seminars and retreats, which did lead to a few adventures, particularly the retreats. I just wanted to reiterate what Bernardine was saying. Yes, there was a magnificent, if you look at the numbers, just the numbers of it, there's a huge shift. It was a significant shift in the landscape of British poetry. To go from less than 1% of Black and Asian poets and poets of color represented by major presses, to see it where it is now at 20%, where every prize giving, every festival, there is representation. That is a huge, huge shift. But I also wanted to say a little bit about the way the infrastructure was changing. Again, Bernadine spoke about it, but I think it's also worth saying how many of the complete works poets are now critics, judges of prizes, lecturers. We now have 2 editors of major presses, so Kayon Chingonyi at Bloomsbury and recently appointed Sarah Howe at Chatto. And because of that, the ripple effect continues and it grows. And I think the most important thing, however, is to also acknowledge that these poets are finally in a space where they can celebrate their poetics and talk about their craft first. So it's not just about the numbers and the identity politics, but it goes much deeper because after all, we must remember these are artists and poets first and foremost. I also wanted to say a little bit about the ripple effect also being magnified so much by the work of the poets themselves. I did want to shout out Nick Makoha, who has founded an extraordinary initiative called the Obsidian Foundation, which works for Black poets in Britain. And also to thank Bloodaxe for setting up the James Berry Poetry Prize, which again is for poets of colour and is really the first scheme of its kind in that the winners are offered full collections. So that is, again, something that helps to keep the momentum going.
And can I just say that the first of those collections by Marjorie Lotfy and Casey Hill are published at the same time as Mapping the Future, and that we're launching the next James Berry Poetry Prize in November, which will run from April of next year. And one of the judges is Patience Agbabi, who just happens to be the poet that Bernadine called in for the new generation poets promotion, that the next generation poets promotion that she mentioned in her introduction. So there's a wonderful synergy in all this rippling, all sort of working together.
Yes, they are absolutely fantastic poets. And we've got 2 more rounds of the James Berry Poetry Prize, so there will be more collections coming. But I also wanted to say something a little bit more about the sort of personal side of it, which I've touched on in my introduction, which is to acknowledge how difficult it was, particularly for the first round of poets, to come into the scheme and the landscape that they were writing into. I remember very well that in an early meeting, and these were people who were supporting the program, someone very senior said to me, "Do Black poets publish full collections?" And it was acceptable for people to think that way, and it was normal. And I think it's really, really important to acknowledge that for the first round, they were writing into a landscape that was just not offering them space. And I think they were incredibly brave also to put their faith into the program because it hadn't been tested, incredibly brave to put their faith in me because I had not been particularly tested within British poetry at that time. And I know that I definitely made mistakes and they were extremely gracious with me. So I really wanted to thank all the poets, but particularly the first round, because I think the work for them was much, much harder. And they created this beautiful space for the second round, who then created a beautiful space for the third round. So I think there was this opening up of opportunity, which is down to the poets. I also wanted to thank Bernadine Evaristo, who is the rock that this is all founded on. It would not be here without her. And she has always been such an incredible supporter of all the poets within the program. I wanted to thank my absolutely brilliant co-editor, Karen McCarthy Woolf, who will be speaking in a moment. Without her editing, the anthology would have been much, much poorer. You should all be very grateful that her keen eye was cast on it, and you will hear her extraordinary poetry as well later this evening. And finally, I also wanted to thank Neil Astley and Bloodaxe, who really had faith in the program before it started, before even we knew which poets were going to come. They really had an attitude, Neil had an attitude of, if we build it, they will come. And that wasn't the prevalent attitude at that time. I think it was an amazing thing to do. And I think Bloodaxe has always had such a real commitment to inclusivity and to investigating and interrogating what that can look like. So I really wanted to give a huge thanks to Neil as well.
Thank you, Natalie. And I should thank you and Bernadine as being the people behind the James Berry Poetry Prize, because it was your idea. So thank you again. So Karen. Karen, you're muted. You're muted, Karen.
Yeah, hello.
Yes. Hello.
I just want to amplify many of those things that Natalie said in terms of my thanks and gratitude. I mean, thinking about being on the Complete Works as a participant, you know, it was really amazing for me, because if I think about now how you know, how I write about poetry, how I write my poetry, how I'm able to articulate and express my poetics, a lot of that was due to being part of that initial cohort. That cohort had poets on it who I already knew, Roger Robinson, Nick Makoha, Malika Booker, Jan Coffey Seppo, people who I'd edited, because I came into the Complete Works as an editor. I've been an editor for many years. But I had never really had the space to share my growth, my my sort of sense of query around my own work. I mean, I was a complete, you know, I was always off to workshops. I was always wanting to learn. You know, I can't remember when I did my master's, if it was before or after, but, you know, there was always that sort of sense of seeking after learning around craft, you know, attending seminars and workshops with Mimi Calvati, who's been a huge ally, a mentor, and ambassador for the Complete Works in many ways. You know, I had done those things, but being able to develop my poetry and an attendant sense of poetics as a Black writer, as a writer of colour, and being able to do that in a collegiate sense, initially with the first cohort, but then as the scheme began to grow, you know, across, you know, in a sense, you know, via a sense of intergenerational conversation and dialogue, and then having the opportunity to actually sort of edit that work, and to work really closely one-to-one with all the amazing writers that are in this book, Mapping the Future, and also in the other editions, has been fantastic. So I would also say that you know, in terms of the mentoring, the one-to-one mentoring, I wanted to work with Michael Simmons Roberts. I was very keen to do so, because I felt that you know, one of the things that I had been very interested in was writing, you know, that idea of where you release your work. Natalie, you mentioned that, you know, and that's always been an interest of mine personally, in terms of into what environment does the work find itself? Is it received? And I was very interested in this idea that perhaps that I as a writer was releasing my work into a landscape that I felt to be, you know, hegemonically, how can I put it, kind of atheist in some ways, and I really wanted to bring sort of spirituality into my work. So that was one of the reasons that I really wanted to work with Michael, and being able to have a conversation with Natalie, and, you know, sort of think in quite a lot of depth about who one wants to work with, and in what capacity, and what you feel they might be able to bring to you as a mentor. That was a really exciting thing for me. So that's certainly kind of my experience of the program that I'd like to mention. And as Nathalie said, you know, we've now got critics and editors, associated artists, so even, you know, kind of writers that maybe weren't part of the complete works, but that Nathalie, you know, very much drew into the extended family. And I do really want to acknowledge Nathalie for that, as well as all her other work, because I feel that that's an important thing, is that the 10 writers that were matched with mentors, you know, that was the core. But there was always the sense that we could reach, that the scheme could reach out further. And so that if perhaps a writer had not been, you know, selected, there was still space for them. And I think that that was so important. And I think that that really is expressive of the sense of welcome and inclusivity. And I think that that in turn is something that I just want to sort of say around the idea of, you know, the variety of poetries that come under the umbrella of the complete works. And I really think that's because it was always a scheme that wanted to develop poets, you know, beyond the binaries of identity. And to really provide a space in which the craft of the work was foremost, because that so often is, you know, Black writers are so often, and writers of colour are so often read against, you know, they're so often read against a sort of default of identity that we can miss a lot of the other really important themes and content in the work, and also the craft of the work itself. And if you think of the Ledbury Critics Programme, you know, the idea that we needed, you know, something that, you know, Sarah Howe was very engaged in developing, but this sort of idea that we would need critics, literary critics, who could, you know, could bring a very sort of, you know, specific and broad understanding of the poetries that are now being produced in this incredible landscape. So that's my experience, and those are the you know, sort of things that I'd sort of really like to flag, and also, of course, to echo and hopefully amplify Nathalie's thanks to Bernardine and to Neil, and also to, very much for me, to all of the other participants and the, you know, of all three cohorts in the complete works, who, you know, are very much, you know, part of a larger family, and support network. And it's wonderful to, you know, it's wonderful to have other writers. I'm looking at Denise Saul's name because it's there in front of me right now. People like Denise and you know, others that I can share my work with. It's been an absolute honor, and I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you, Karen. Now, if you both like to go next door, we're now going to hear the first of the live poets, who is Leo Boix, originally from Argentina. He's a Latinx poet who lives in London, and that's where he is reading from tonight. Leo.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Karen, Nathalie, and Bernardine for the lovely introductions. I'm really excited to be here tonight, celebrating mapping the future, and I feel just so honoured to be part of the complete works, and a privilege to be part of this family. I consider it a family of poets. So thank you all. It's been really wonderful. So I'm going to read a few poems from the anthology, and then some more newer poems. A Latin American sonnet. There is a palm tree somewhere, and a bird of paradise that speaks to me in my dreams. Well, not actually a bird, more like a blurred vision of a plane crossing the endless seams of a continent too big to fit here, in this isle of gold where we plant elder for shade, sit under dusty sun, whatever it takes. Miles away from everywhere, in my dreams, a Brit asks all the questions, and I often reply, whoever comes for tea will one day have to leave for a better world. I end up kissing the beau, who is from here or just about. So naive. A blue parrot repeats my name in Old English. Leo, Leonardo. Perhaps it was a dream. Well, ish. A Latin American Sonnet 3. We are the only Latin Americans in Deal. There was a loud Uruguayan lady who left for Madrid and was never seen again. I feel like a parakeet sometimes, I have to confess. I have a boyfriend now who, like me, came from Buenos Aires. He has lived here almost all his life. People can't tell till he says his name. Our old house is a pseudo-Argentine outpost where we drink hot mate, eat steaks. Inside here, we speak an odd Spanish, a mismatched melee of words we've created. Monopato, a dormir. As if we were in our own world, both castaways. Sometimes it's tough, and sometimes it gets better. Let's drink to that and to our long life together. Eucalyptus. After years of searching, I find my father standing by the old tree he'd prune every spring to grow leafy before the sweltering heat of our subtropical summer. Who's there? He asks. I'm your son, Dad, tu hijo. Your first wife's dead, like you. We buried her south of Buenos Aires. You sure? He inquires. A dirty mate gourd in his tarred hands. You are interred somewhere north of the General Paz motorway. He nods, sips his sweet drink, gives me a tangerine, then crosses the empty patio to his unkept tool shed. Handsaws, nails getting rustier. I leave by the yard door. He whistles from his world through the dream, where the tree grows taller every time I look back. My next poem is from my collection, Ballad of a Happy Immigrant, and it's called Invocation. The early spring day stands on its toes, perplexed at me singing in my other voice. Here I'm naming all the things I see anew, unaware of the O's, the Z's, the greenness in a flash of time, a sudden call to remember this odd dislocation, the awkwardness of a brash collar. Surviving requires cunning, proper diction. You shouldn't be here where you never belonged. All these years, I've been looking for a simple sign, a shift, the difference between a sudden loss and a life that starts anew. And my final poem is a Latin American sonnet, and this will be part of my forthcoming collection next year. a Latin American sonnet 58. We sometimes imagine moving out elsewhere to start anew in a faraway country. We toy with Italy for its churches, its statues, its beautiful marble squares, for the food and ancient cities. We think to start in Sicily and from there to go to Egypt, to live near the river Nile, or even to Greece, to escape to a quiet town under the sun. You making drawings and I writing books, both in exile, fleeing the London life as fugitives, two men on the run. Like the mighty creature in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, who, after swearing revenge against humans, kills his maker's friends and then demands of him to create a companion like himself, argues he has a right to happiness and laughter, and says if he agrees, no human being will ever see them again, fleeing to the vast wilds of South America, that unimaginable terrain. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you, Leo. And now we're going to hear from Edward Doegar.
Hi, thanks. An imaginal terrain. It's a beautiful phrase here. So I'm going to start with a poem that's in the anthology called After Remainder. And the poem is written for and after. The artist Sarah MacDonald. I'm very fond of her paintings. And you can actually see the poem that this poem is based on behind me. Its starting point was this poem called After Remainder, which she made in response to Tom McCarthy's novel Remainder. And it goes like this. After Remainder. What I hadn't expected was what I hadn't remembered. The exact variety of yellow that was these several yellows. The inside yuck of custard and the air digested quality of the skin. That jaundiced view of things that turns cliche true. Off-putting is the perfect yoke of any rhymed word, heard only for its own sake. As the chain of metaphor insists on the concept of slavery, another victimless crime of the untethered mind, which is a view I contemplate but can't confront, as if the stairs led somewhere to a pattern on the wall, as if the pattern on the wall recalled the details in a book I haven't read but can quote and forget. In the light of the Frankfurt Book Fair's decision to de-platform the Palestinian writer Adania Schulbli's book Minor Detail, which was due to win a literary award on the 20th of October, I'd like to read the following poem by Najwan Darwish. It comes from a collection, Embrace, which I edited for the Poetry Translation Center, and I'll read it in English from the translations which were made by Atef Al-Shair, working with Paul Batchelor. At a poetry festival. In front of each poet, their country's name. Next to my name, nothing but Jerusalem. How frightening your name must be, my little country. Nothing remains of you but the name. I sleep and I wake with it, your name, like a boat with no hope of arrival or return. It never arrives nor returns. It neither arrives nor drowns. And finally, I'm going to read two sections from a longer work adaptation which I made in collaboration with the artist Shakib Abu Hamdan. The volume was published by Kelda Press from their series In the Round, and the text of the work weaves together various strands, some purely original writing, largely concerning the figure of the butterfly, and some writing derived from research facts on various topics, and finally some found texts from newspapers that discuss the situation in Ukraine, the political situation in Ukraine, from a UK perspective over many years, from 2022 to 2004, going backwards. And the found texts from the newspapers are taken from very different political positions within the UK context, but they've been spliced together. I'm going to read in the work itself what constitutes the opening and closing sections of the main body of the work. So the first one. The butterfly represents itself. The pins, when it was held in place by pins, represented nothing. Now that the glue has taken, they have been removed. This leaves the butterfly to describe itself, alive. Unimpeded, the butterfly is staged in the element of time, suspended as if, having happened to alight on the display, the mere hint of an encroaching shadow could prompt it from the page. But held fast, it stays placed in quite unnatural repose, too fully splayed to illustrate our view. Appreciated thus, its wings articulate their perfect scream of butterfly. The animal now agonizing as a petal. And yet, to the more discerning eye, this must mean more or less, narrowed as everything is by knowledge, to a species, a territory, a preference of food, a tolerance of climate. In this strict lesson of itself, the butterfly represents only what we understand the butterfly to be. Its purpose, here on the page, illuminating the study. So this is the final section, and the last thing I'll read of the work. There is a small epilogue, but this comes from various newspaper outlets from 2004. Those outlets are The Guardian, The Economist, The Spectator. Week 2 in Ukraine's democratic revolution, and the protests in the streets of Kiev have grown. So has confusion over what happens next and over the likely eventual outcome. Russia's interests are not well served by fostering puppet dictators in its near abroad. They seldom prove malleable to the Kremlin. Consider Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus. And if and when they are overthrown by democratic protests, their successors are more likely to pursue anti-Russian policies. Look at Mikhail Saakashvili in Georgia. Mr. Putin met the outgoing president of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma, at a Moscow airport and backed his idea of starting the entire election from scratch. The largely symbolic meeting coincided with a cautionary intervention from President George Bush, who insisted that the election process ought to be free from any foreign influence. Mr. Putin sees his opportunity and is undoubtedly pulling strings in eastern Ukraine. Yanukovych's support is not confined to workers. Among the outstanding leggy fur-clad devuchkas of the Donetsk University Language Department, here, as the world over, languages are a girly subject. The lecturers and professors are as stoutly pro-Yanukovych as the miners are. I begin to wonder whether Jean Baudrillard was right that the Gulf War never took place. When the West decides to sponsor the overthrow of a government by means of a popular revolution, representation really does become reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you for reading Najma Darwish's poem in support of Adanya Shibli. We're now going to hear from Will Harris.
Hello, hi, hopefully you can hear me. Thank you for those readings, Leo and Ed, and thank you, Natalie, and Karen and Bernadine remotely. It's really great to be here together virtually celebrating this book, and it's made me reflect on everything it's meant for me to be part of a collective of writers in this loose extended family. And yeah, I also wanted to thank Ed for bringing in the context, as this is a live event, even though we're not present in the same place. It feels important to speak to live things which are happening. And it's strange to be sharing poems in a context in which genocide is being perpetrated. But I thought I'd read two things. And one of them is not in the anthology, and then I'll close with the poem that is. And yeah, and I guess both of them are speaking to things, thoughts, conversations which began with other people in the complete works and mentors. Sarah Howe was my mentor, and really helped me a lot during a difficult time. So this is the first poem, and some context. I work in care homes in East London, so that job involves a lot of making tea. Speaky Stonehenge. I was thinking about it last week as I was helping Kath to her seat, that Stonehenge is stitched into the English national psyche. But genomic research published in 2018 suggests that the Neolithic people who constructed Stonehenge and their descendants who carried the memory of its use were replaced by Beaker people from Central Europe and Iberia over 4,000 years ago. I was thinking this alters the relationship between Stonehenge and its visitors. Though white English tourists might see themselves as communing with their ancestors at Stonehenge, it could be said that foreign tourists encounter it in a way more closely resembling that of Britain's ancestors, as bizarre objects out of time and space. I was thinking this as I was helping Kath to her seat. It's standard to refer to Bronze Age cultures by their styles of pottery, like bell beakers or corded ware. The beaker people are defined by the vessels they used. An analogy could be drawn with language use. Focus on the speaker ignores the extent to which language, a kind of vessel, speaks through us. I was thinking about this as I was helping Kath to her seat, and Frank shouted across the room at me. He wanted a cup of tea. "Speaky English," he shouted. At first, I misheard him. I thought he was maybe using speaky in a sense that was new to me, indicating a counterpart to the speaker. In my head, Frank was asking me if I was not so much a speaker of English, in control of my language, as a speakee, someone to whom the language, English, only flows through. I was thinking this as I helped Kath to her seat. I remembered meeting Gary 4 years ago. He was an administrator at English Heritage, and he told me that a month after his mum died, he'd gone to Stonehenge. He stepped over the ropes and stood in the middle of the stone circle, at which point he realized that it was a monument to our ancestors. He was crying as he said this, so I didn't mention the beaker people. He paused at the word "our" and looked at me. It could have been the association with his mum, a private "our" he'd lost. But that look seemed to communicate a public "our," which excluded me. "I felt that," he said. I was thinking about this last week as I helped Kath to her seat and Frank shouted across the room. I thought of Stonehenge. The speaker stands inside the monument, unable to experience it. Instead, the monument speaks through them. They are the speakee. I always find I stop breathing while I'm reading online. By the end of a paragraph, I've basically almost fainted, but just managed to hold it together. Okay, I'm going to read from the anthology. I'm going to read from the book. This is the last poem in my book, Brother Poem. And yeah, it's about the possibility of collective action and creating, imagining, simulating a kind of collectivity through language. Take the origin of Banal, a banal mill where tenants carried their corn to be ground for the benefit of the Lord. But imagine it without the Lord, all of us taking our corn to the mill saying, "I'm sad, I'm lonely, I can't take it," and then grinding the corn, baking it, sharing it. I eat if you eat. Maybe it's the knowledge of what's shared or could be that stops me on the point of exposure, of breaking down, because I can't let go of feelings, of the belief in a singular self without which I disappear, or hear you speaking with my mouth, my pain in yours. Why do you write? I saw you standing on the corner with a bag of food. When the light changed, it was summer and we were by the river, talking. I was trying to explain why writing is pointless, but you were there. The point of writing is to address you. It's so embarrassing to talk like this. At the checkout, I forgot what I had to buy. Another memory appeared like washing up liquid replaced by fizzy drinks, a feeling that didn't begin with me. And I pictured you saying this to yourself as you waited on the corner with a bag of food, also having forgotten some obvious thing, its place taken by the image of a river, green with scum, fish floating to the surface in a sudden trance. You couldn't work out where it was or who was talking, but the fact it happened made us both feel calm. So we decided, standing there, to regard all our feelings as mutual, the only action as collective, and speech a way of taking it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. And I'd just like to show that poem as an indication of the formal variousness of the work in mapping the future. Thank you for keeping it together in the end. We're now going to hear from Nick Makoha.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Hope you're well. In times like these, it's good to be able to be in a community of poets. My heart goes out to those who have lost lives and loved ones and who are going through stress right now, but also to some of the poets that we've lost this year, particularly Boix, and also to our extended family of the complete works, people like Caleb Fermi, Teresa Lola, Ilwellums. So yeah, and thank you for being Nathalie and Bernadine and all involved in allowing us to be this community, because it's funny what you can do with a little space and time. So I'm going to read you 3 poems from my forthcoming collection. I don't know where it's going, but it's called The New Carthaginians. The New Carthaginians are myself, a resurrected Jean-Michel Basquiat after 2 of his paintings. One is called Hollywood Africans, and you can check that up online. And the other one is called Mecca. And then one thing that Basquiat did a lot of the time is he made self-portraits. So the final poem will be called A True Account of a Hijacking at Entebbe Airport. And basically, I'm using Basquiat's paintings to create a new myth of my own narrative. And one of the focal points is the Entebbe hijacking that happened in the country of my origin, which is Uganda. So I will start with Mecca, and then we'll go to Hollywood Africans, and then we'll read what I call a footnote poem, which is the one about the airport. Let's start with Mecca. So just bear with me. Mecca. Downtown summer lengthens. Basquiat starts painting the never-ending night of space with its sonic madness, as if it were a water flowing down to the sea. The poet exits the subway to enter a gallery. In the basement, he salutes the painter with the words "spirit and fire," which loosely translates to "forgive this interlude." Scratch that. I've never been able to find a recording of Johnson signing the treaty of the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Outside my apartment window, a patch of grass is trying to become a desert. Scratch that. I bet sweat dripping from Johnson's brow after making love to his wife in the Oval Office. He realizes that if he lets them push the button, then his grandchildren won't survive. And that's why he sighs, and Mrs. Johnson's won't be able to conceive. No, scratch that. Or maybe the barber wraps a hot towel around his face, and in that intimacy, the same intimacy men have when they prepare their parachutes to jump out of a plane, the same intimacy that Ramesses II's handmaidens wrapped his body in as they hummed his name in the sky, devoid of its moon, or devoid of his name. That was the sugar and water in his mouth as they massaged the bones of the great hidden God. Maybe by the process of elimination, this is how things disappear. If the oceans disappear, it will invite the sun into its house. But if a plane disappears, what happens to the hostages? If a min disappears, who will look after my people? Could you love my city as if it were your own? Scratch that. Okay, that was Mecca. And now I'll read you Hollywood Africans, which is just several things. It is, how would I say it? It's a kind of recreation of how I fell in love with my wife, but it's also, she doesn't know that yet, so don't tell her, because she hates our life in public. But it's also a recreation of how Basquiat and myself and this Icarus I'm creating and this Basquiat that I'm creating met. So let me just read that to you. And these 3 are in the book. So Hollywood Africans. The only thing that was certain was that it was June and we had split a pepperoni pizza between us. An ultraviolet light set the room. Basquiat channel surfing, looking for cartoons while Icarus prodded the canvas to see if the image fit precisely to the frame. He was certain that someone had broken in. I'm getting set to coast towards the front door when the girl of my dreams walks in. Now, I have to make some lame excuse about how I'm off to the bodega to get some smokes and how I have a craving for meat. I'm bound by this habit. She just smiles. I smile back. Then a voice from the back of my throat says, "You can come with." Cut to me and her at a stop sign. I don't want to play the right game the wrong way. In the silence that has followed us from the front door, I swat a crown of mosquitoes above her head. There is no water, but I can smell the ocean. The man at the store is sweeping the street, at which point I ask her name. I've only ever seen her in a gallery with a glass of Prosecco in her hand. I watch the man watching us in that night, in that long summer. She pulls out some ice cream from the freezer and adds it to the bill. The pulp of her lips are flint and fire. The birds are silent, and so is the wind. The rest of the night falls away. In another magic, she calls me by my original name. It is difficult to know what to walk away from. She asks why my eyebrows are raised. We are sitting at the top of a park bench watching time. We are a part of it, right here in New York City. This is where the road delivers us towards the edge of difference. Butterscotch drips from my fingers and falls to the tarmac, a beautiful suspension. Then I, or you, or whoever decides to look, hand rolls a cigarette as we rummage through our back pockets for a light. Okay, here we go. So this poem here, the final poem I'm going to share with you is a portrait, but not just a portrait of people, but also a portrait of, I guess, Africa, but specifically East Africa, more specifically Uganda, and a bunch of other things. But ultimately, it is two poems fused into one, and it's something that Basquiat himself did, which was to make triptychs and diptychs, and this is my expression of that. A true account of a hijacking at Entebbe Airport. JFK, LAX to JFK. A warrior wind is seeking what we have lost, but the pilot has the wings of the red eye under his command. As the night flickers on, the world below widens, bat-like. It begins with a slogan like "The city never sleeps," and the descending prayer, call whispering in the wind, and the idea that works, entrusted to the bodyguard at the temple as a people attempt to become a modern imperial state. Now, whether they will succeed will depend on how they enter the next scene. Ammunition prices have risen dramatically. In an unswept house, a woman enters from the street outside with her firstborn cradled in her arms. Her streets, like mine, are filled with security men with old rifles. Don't always get the story you want. You don't always get the story you want, even when the runway changes. Once in a type of beginning, after the Roots concert, but before check-in, I packed my bag the way I packed my heart. There it lay on the bed, towel around my waist. At check-in, the stewardess with the perfect posture handed me back my passport as if it were weightless. Does that make us kin? She uncovers her face and shuts the rest of the world out. This is what I have learned about the man that sleeps in her bed. He will be dead in a week. Unlike Ulysses, he will not come back home from a war. When the space his heart takes becomes a leaking red dot, she will swear she saw his face in the clouds. Women will think she is talking to the sun, whose power it is to make the gods afraid with its red center. For a while, they will entertain it. When she writes in the sand, I have watched over you. Actually, more than once, I have packed my heart in a bag, hoping that it could inhabit a body, a memory, an island bigger than this one. If I stay still for too long, the body hardens, the way the black cake does when you don't follow the recipe. But this is not the shield of Achilles or the Star of David. When the beetles see its glow, they run backward into the dark. What is the purpose of an empty field? Mr. Kane, my science teacher, would talk to me and would look at me in the face as if the boats were coming in and say, a field is a numerical property of an extended part of the universe. The smart aleck in me would ask, do you know how to get there from here? My family picked cotton from a field. Here is a dark sky. There was an airfield. He, who she calls the shield, has now a battered body. Dear friends, although I pick at my lunch, it does not alter the natural order of things. This flight bears the sweetness of wings. Dear circus, dear night, break loose when he and his crew are offered freedom. Instead, in the weight of that dimension, he says the words that, like twilight, are worth repeating. What I am is not important. And in that delicate frequency, with lowered garments, they give him back his life. But it is not a cure for exile. If I were to say how much further, it would make no difference. As we descend toward the shoreline, read my eyes like a clock. Surely the sky, in its appetite, is open to us. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Nick. And we're going to now move on to Denise Saul.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I'd just like to thank Neil, Bernadine, and Natalie for creating a really safe space for us poets. The poems I'm going to read are from the anthology and from my collection. The White Room. There is a moment for meditation when the doctor leads me into the room with table, bed, and cupboard. When he leaves, I look out of the small window. There's a view of other windows unknown. I never thought I'd make peace with noise, chimes of the midnight bell, traffic, low-flying planes remind me that God is a never-ending white ceiling. I look at the right hand that does not move on the cushion, and I name it Paula. The clenched fingers look like a woman's head, and this is where I locate a mouth in this small fist. John Stammers was my mentor, and he really helped me to understand the psychology of a poem. And that really supported me to write poems about trauma. This next poem is about caregiving. A daughter's perspective. When morning arrives, the radio stops speaking. Now, instead of hearing a mother speak from one infinitely distant and divine point of view, further points of view are included in our conversation. If I stand in front of the window and look at her wheelchair, the person in front of me seems to be smaller the closer she is. I rub hand cream into the back of her hand, starting at the wrist and working away from the heart. The nurse told me that it was better to massage away from the heart and not towards it. My mother opens her left hand and I pour some cream in her palm. She massages the back of my hand. I talk to her about work, neighbors, and when she would be coming home. Representation of a scene is often one simple conversation. I asked the physiotherapist about walking with a cane. In the beginning, I thought she said that walking was possible. Even though I asked her before about leg support, she said, never, and wheelchair. But since my question did not produce an answer, I repeated it. She stood still, looking around the room as though she had never been here. On the second visit, I did not expect an answer from her because I had asked the same question twice. In the evening, I read Paul Broca's Memoir d'Anthologie. My mother recites sentences from the left hemisphere. In the mindfulness of listening, Sundays at home, at home. I'm always intrigued about spaces when you're confined in a house as a carer. Someone walked into a garden. He's the same one who gave us the word and took it away when we sat in the garden where bindweed climbed the wall. A bracket of cowslips gathered under the dogwood. This was where we heard him count 7 days into a week. We saw someone who looked like you. And when she turned around, it was me talking to myself. And I have dreamt this before, someone who walked into a garden. I know it's you when I talk with the God of Roses. I have dreamt this often. And I'll just read my final poem, which is dedicated to all those who are now silenced. A woman travels in search of sound. On the move again, this time to Surrey, but I could not take with me all the plants my family left behind. The row of simple petunias made their last appearance this summer. All the plants, I hear them, and the quieter they are, the more I hear them. The breaking sound of twigs comes to me as I clear away leaves under bushes. A helicopter overhead circles the house. Its presence breaks the many silences of grass. I hear all the registers of flowers. Newton was not the first to make a connection with the ways of green. It's part yellow and part blue. Here, the petunias follow mother's ordering of size rather than of importance. Even with the final walk from the side gate to removal van, I hear the unequal division of sound between the tread on a concrete path and quiet water pooling beneath the gutter. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. And our thoughts are also with John Stammers and his family at the moment. As many of you will know, he isn't at all well. So our final reader in the live section will be Karen McCarthy Woolf.
Thanks, Neil. Thank you, Denise. That was mesmeric. And thanks to all the other readers. Such thoughtful and interrogative work. I'm going to read the poem I have in the book. It's an excerpt from my collection, which is forthcoming next year. It's called Unsafe, Un/Safe. And it's really thinking about ownership, land, settler capitalism, the precarity of the Black body in that space, and also a theme which I pursued in my last book, Seasonal Disturbances, thinking about gentrification. It's actually a disrupted glossa. A glossa is a 15th century Spanish form, and it's a little bit like a cento. We might also think of the golden shovel, in that it takes from another poem and expands on it, and uses elements from another poem. In this case, it's John Clare's The Village Minstrel. So you have 4 lines, and then each line of that sort of quatrain you use at the end of a 10-line verse. This is a disrupted version, it's much longer. certainly in terms of how the lines play out. I'll read from that now. O England, boasted land of liberty, with strangers still thou mayst thy title own, but thy poor slaves the alteration see, with many a loss to them, the truth is known. That's John Clare, the village minstrel. O England, boasted land of liberty, of palms drummed strong on pink and gristled chests, of lawns landscaped to rust, liverish as dog's piss in summer's drought, windswept and observed on closed and uptight circuits, where one good eye's enough. How erotic, always to be watched while we slept through hurricanes and other chaotic procedures. Our demise, a triptych on the walls of multi-story glassy cathedrals, the centre panel a tissue of idyllic hills and hens, clucking a corporate pastoral, epic as it was causal. On every treetop a crow, crowned a survivor, guzzling from oily puddles, while worthless kings allowed nothing and everything, so kleptocracy flowered, bloody as exploded capillaries. Capillaries, exponential detonations designed to devour all forms of flesh and resistance, bodily or otherwise. O walled world of disparity and hard surfaces, of barbed fences augmented by engineered despair and steel cages, where algorithmic swords pierce skin, gluttonous for the gruel of hard knocks. Behold the petal, silky and violet. Only bees ignore the buzz of armed response, systems to keep each Eden in violet. Every lavender bush and cactus flower is private. Do not pick the fruit. A pilfered blackberry is a sin that stains this age of ordered disquiet. In America, oh, boasted land of liberty. Oh, boasted land of liberty, America, of winged flamingo skies and thrusting palms, of sweat-rich fields and manufactured terror, deadly as Academy awarded napalm, don't forget the TMs, for nouns and verbs can be bought and loaned. And although the enemy is history, misremembered, with strangers still thou may thy title own. You claim these stolen lands, call elders crone and daughters bitches, as if the one who calls you friend deserves no more than scorn. Who doesn't need a bone to chew on? God knows why else a dog still loves a fiend. Blood rules the pack that blindly follows, nose to the coiled and entrailed end. But thy poor slaves the alteration see. Tents deemed to have marred the view are removed, residents gunned down when they protest against hostile fire, with many a loss to them. The truth is known. And I'm going to finish with a short prose poem that's part of this triptych, which I wrote. I was in America on a Fulbright postdoctoral scholarship, living in Los Angeles, and a lot of the work within Unsafe is thinking really about, sort of thinking about the settlement of the American West. Anyway, this actually just takes place on a road trip. On our road trip from Wyoming to Colorado via South Dakota, I noticed the animals, the cattle, are all more tightly penned, squashed together like marshmallows in a packet, though deer still run at the edge of the fence. We've been in Nebraska 2 minutes when the police pull us over. The younger officer is the sheriff. He's nervous, terribly polite, introduces himself as Rhett. Not Rhett Butler, he says, but it is like Rhett Butler. It is a gleaming, multi-columned southern mansion, especially when he laughs nervously. Did I say that he was nervous? Did I say the older officer never takes his hand off his gun, won't look me in the eyes, keeps his distance, that I'm careful to move slowly as I reach into the glove compartment for Zoe's papers? Did I say that Zoe is dark-skinned? Can you imagine a whiter name? Rhett asks.
Thank you, Karen.
Those are my poems.
And we're now going to move to 10 more poets from the anthology, each reading a poem each from different parts of the country and other parts of the world. They're all introduced with captions, so we're just going to go straight into that. And at the end of that, we'll come together for a further talk.
Dreaming is a form of knowledge production. Nobody's immune to their ego taking the wheel. Dreaming is a form of knowledge production, and they don't want it to be that easy for us. As in, lay your head on a pillow, wake up holding something new. I said what I said. Not what you say, I said. Pigs are outside the house, but next door this time. It's not something our relationship will be able to survive. He doesn't show it the cat, but he loves me so. He has the gene, but it hasn't kicked in yet. Another 1,000 years. All thinking and no feeling. Shut up about Freud.
Hi, my name is Ian Humphreys. I'm going to read a poem from my new collection, Tormentil. It's called The Wood Warbler's Song. It's unmistakable, a thin coin spinning on a plate. The sound springs from nowhere, then somewhere over there, tangling itself around a thorn, rising sharply through rusted bracken. I pause until the high-pitched trill stutters to a halt. Heads or tails. It could go either way. The ICU doctor warned us last night. And now I wonder, what news of you waits for me down there in the valley, where my no-signal phone will chirp back to life in my hand?
Proof of Life on Earth, in memory of Marion Williams. In the Museum of 500,000 Objects, my eyes don't know where to settle, so I lose myself amongst the maze of cases. Every surface is covered, every cabinet packed with artifacts, acquisition numbers tattooed conspicuously in precise white paint. The guide says, much of the collection relates to how to attract a loved one, how to survive, how to deal with grief. In my private state of deferred grief, amidst the ordered chaos of the present in conversation with the past, I am drawn to the weapons of war. In the upper gallery, the tools we use to harm each other, objects whose sole function is to cause injury or death, are displayed according to type. I learned that the sword was developed purely for human combat, and that in most cultures women and swords are rarely found. The evolution of guns mirrors the evolution of man, trial and error and experimentation, each new generation more efficient, more lethal. There is a broadsword, too heavy to carry, and a Walther PP too dangerous to be placed in the hands of a poet, objects out of bounds. Instead, I study a single late medieval boot, 100 hobnails hammered into its sole, and a brass aquamanile in the form of a horse. We can look, but not touch. So I slip into a minor state of sensory deprivation, sketch the boot's layers of old animal skin, try to conjure the wearer and connect with a time when technology evolved slowly, where history was recorded at a human pace. I imagine the aquamanile filled with water, imagine purifying my hands of the trauma of passing through the stages of life, rinsing away the fear that comes from awaiting the death of a loved one, and an ever-deepening belief in the absence of any gods.
Hi, I'm Rashid Astidar, and this poem from Mapping the Future is called Time Takes a Moment. There's snow on my daffodils this morning, and time takes a moment to wonder what it has done in springing spring early, pretending it is single-minded, endless flow, when it is actually eddies, reverses, stops, starts, sudden lurches, minutes of intense focus. Then it says, you should be looking so hard apertures break, trying to pin this random arrangement of light down to morning tracking pixels. Capture this now because all your nows make up you. And who would you rather be? A flower waking up cold is as beautiful as you. It's worth being still to remember that.
Elegy for the Latter-day Teen Wilderness Years by Adam Lowe. Joan, Trashley and Gingerella lived in a one-bed flat. You'd never seen girls with more poise. Our style made them sick. We had a cribbed language others didn't understand, and that gave us power. We made the streetlights our spots. We were fierce, en vogue. We spoke in the high tones of grand dames, sashayed and preened. There we were royalty. You should have seen that long coat drag along the floor. We found fake fur in a skip, but wore it like mink. We were kings anyway. We made our lives like that, rooting in bins round the back of Queen's Court, living thrifty and spare. We would hold hands and link arms on the march to some nearby far after party. We could leap across the horizon in electric blue heels and banish bigots with a look. In dim chill-outs, we made community with chatter and gossip, hugs that bookended us, on the couch and on the bed. Ours was a private world where our love for each other went unsaid, and we expressed our bonds in nicknames and twisting hips. I was Beyoncé, you were Mariah, she was Violet. We lived in the witching hybrid hours, where the dark and dim had pride of place. We were bold and wild, our songs ricocheted against the naked heavens. Then the clouds would thicken like stones. The morning would pour over us like molten gold, swallowing the glitter and bruises of night.
The methods employed to ascend to the nest of a bird of prey depend, in each instance, upon its site. If, however, the area is built in the fissure of a lofty rock, a man, already secured with such as a rope, descends or is lowered from the rim of a mountain or cliff to the level of the hollow in which the area is built. and, upon entering, lifts the bird from the nest. From How to Reach the Eyrie, The Art of Falconry, Volume 2. Hello. I'm so delighted to share my poem with you, Studio Apartment Eyrie. Greetings from Costa Rica. Studio Apartment Eyrie. I am Lena Panchev. Naturally, he pursues me in spite of, or rather more likely because of, the lofty differences. Sex, age, class, side effects, no doubt, of the East-West entente. I am, after all, his first girl. To reach me, he will have to change territory, carry with him mon adresse, termed il mio indirizzo, a scrap of intemperance or incitement that is surviving the creases it is folded under. As if this wasn't enough, he must make inquiries. He has to climb, in mean light, 5 twisting flights of what has been condemned. Traverse a banister too shaky and broken to be depended upon. He does all this in spite. Expecting no one, I was painting a conspicuously clean portrayal of a Venetian canal scene. My brush, newly dipped, was hovering just out of the blue paint tin when the doorbell rang. Kia, it's me. Ah, that English. I find him astonished, peering down the sheer drop. I talk non-stop to relax him, cook for us a simple dinner, pasta, on the spirit stove, which is expressly forbidden. But since when has propriety ever stopped me? I'm refusing to pay rent out of solidarity. What is important is that he has desire. Above all, he's here. And from this vantage, my life is a unique wonder that will never cease. I am the fulcrum of this fiction. I know this instinctively. I say I am not in rivalry, never with no one. My convictions usually arrive this way, a stubborn bouquet of roses on a doorstep, unignorable, odious, quasi-beautiful. Who sent these? Why? Probably Cavaliere. And furthermore, who has horses in Venice to ride to the door? Fools. Only the stubborn. Isn't it stubbornness that is keeping me so girlishly young? My answer, he loves me. What more is love than to be watched, pacing the ground floor? To be dissident to yourself, refugee in someone else. I'm not cruel when I tell him, go back to your own country, and accompany him down the precarious heights, carrying for us both some precious little light.
Genius Loci. Rubbing my rhubarb in Washington Square, the infamous but much loved wearer of woolen hats in hot weather, the wonder dog, lamper of gold dust dredgers, champ of wild goose pursuits, I, the one-man band, clockless animal, whistling Tarzan, crap in the grass, rapture dalliance on benches, chuckle in my yellow beard a fuzz of tasty syllables. My drinking glass, my hand, I raise to Birdman, pigeons on his shoulders, blues harp in his lips, to acclaim the wide-mouthed tulips, velveteen wine and Kool-Aid hues, to bronze Giuseppe's pillbox, sarcastic squirrels mocking tourists from on top, but not those green Visigoths, the sing-alongers peddling gods. I'll take real figs and not their painted ones. And you, stoic lunch-hour zebra, bent at your tuna sandwich, shrink-wrapped in pinstriped wool for the daily auto da fe, Do you question that I am cobalt to the blood, a rain charmer, frog prince for a nickel with cocksure lull, human with the composition of smoke? I shoulder the kiloton of cogitation, the torture of day-glow tigers padding non-stop my yellow sleeps. But to any tethered chimp that pities me my leper life, I proffer this garden cosmopolis, its stores of salt and creamsicle, lucid dreamers with eyes wide.
My Ghost in the Witness Stand is a long sequence of sonnets. I'm going to be reading two excerpts. The first excerpt is a sonnet coupling, and the coupling form is a form created by the poet Karen McCarthy Woolf, where you have an original text and then a poetic line, original text of prose, and a poetic line responding. So the text here is the biblical text from the St. James Bible, and the Levite's wife is responding back to the text. And the second excerpt that I'm going to read is a sonnet duplex, and that's a form that was invented by the African-American poet Jericho Brown. I'll now read the poem. So no, before I read the poem, just to say that the Levite is a story taken from Judges in the Bible. And so imagine that the protagonist, the ghost in the witness stand, is actually in the witness stand telling her own story. My ghost in the witness stand. And it came to pass in those days when him woo me like dew shine on grass blade. And it came to pass in those days when I was pastures green, not white, ripe to be swayed. And there was a certain Levite who took to him, not took to him, stayed instead ensnared. And that there was a certain Levite who took to him, that then wore no broke me up like untamed mare. And that there was a certain Levite sojourning, loitering, liming to whistle gal passing rum shop. That there was a certain Levite sojourning, label horn a man, who woo gal for fling down hilltop, who took to him a concubine out of, say took me to him as damned wife thereof. There have a way start eye up my body, say he thickening me up like eyes a rump. Say he thickening me up like eyes a rump, body to dissect, slaughter, quarter, and cut up. Body to dissect, slaughter, quarter, and cut up. I was parade each day on his auction block. My parades are pirouettes, toes bloody on wood block. Is the way he watch me, make a had was to run. Is the way he fist lick me, make a had was to run. 1 foot in front of the other, me skin put foot. 1 foot in front of the other, me black skin put foot. 'Cause in his words, I was a bird to pluck.
I was on holiday with my girlfriend in Lisbon. I was on a bus full of black Portuguese passengers. I listened, and then I realized that I could understand all the conversations. Gossip about boyfriends, anger with bosses, information about stopping irritation, laments that the driver was driving too slow. I thought that they all knew English, and it slowly dawned on me that they were all speaking Portuguese. I don't speak Portuguese, but I could understand every word. I told my girlfriend that I could understand every word the Portuguese busgoers were saying, but she couldn't understand me, and as she spoke, I couldn't understand her. I thought that perhaps I was too tired from the plane flight, but my comprehension continued and my girlfriend was getting frustrated, thinking that I was faking it somehow. I asked the black man in Portuguese if he spoke English to translate between my girlfriend and I. He said yes. I explained the situation to him. He looked at me for a second and says it in English to my girlfriend. My girlfriend shouts something to me and storms off. I look at him and ask what did she say. He averts his eyes and says he'd rather not say.
The Devil's Rope, 1. Devil knows I've mauled a good few bodies in my day, and often left the souls for him. Lock out, lock in, moot point, and makes no odds. Whatever way you cross, I'll cut your skin, but still you try to dodge my barbs, poor sods. I've crossed the open plains and closed them in. I've edged a desert war. I've manned the trenches. Now I'm raising Fortress Europe's latest fences. 2. A pioneer in 1871, I was proud to be the settler's solution. Who cared if tribal ways of life were gone, now that the buffalo would face extinction? Don't blame me, a mere pawn in Lincoln's plan to span from coast to coast and build a nation. He left the Sioux and Cheyenne with no hope. I guess that's why they named me Devil's Rope. My exploits in the trenches made me famous. I thrived in war, I stood up to the test. I'm proud to say my presence made men nervous. My calls were sharp, troops fell, you know the rest. I'll tell you, at the risk of sounding callous, I served both sides and always did my best to shield them, but my main aim was to rip. So countless soldiers died whilst in my grip. I did the job so well, they brought me back for World War II. Ideal for desert duty on Rommel's front line against the desert rats, I travelled north from Sollum over 30 sandy miles to Jagboob. Hard to keep track of all my talents, all my dirty tricks. One thing is clear, I'm keen to serve, upstanding. To tell the truth, I don't care who's commanding. I'm not done yet. Now Europe needs defence. It's not my fault if children get entangled in my razor wiring. There's no pretence. The work is tough, seen from any angle, no matter their distress. I am the fence that holds Europe's borders. Let's not wrangle. Though refugees might want the chance to settle, I thwart their hopes, proving the strength of metal.
Hello, this is a poem from the essay I have in Mapping the Future, and this poem is called Fuck Time. Once upon a time, Yo-Yo-Ma, traveling through Botswana, searching for music, crosses a local shaman singing into the savannah. He rushes to notate the melody. Please sing again, he requests, to which the shaman sings something else and explains to the baffled Yo-Yo-Ma that earlier clouds had covered the sun and wild antelope grazed in the distance. But the dial of the world had twirled since. The antelope had cantered into some other future. The clouds had gone. So the song had to change, had to slough off the chains us mortals clasp everything with, even our fluid wrists. The universe, in fact, is monstrously indifferent to the presence of man. We are small as moth wing fall in an orchestra, broad as galaxies, playing a symphony time isn't bothered to fathom. It respects no constant and is always moving on.
And now we're going to come together for discussion between the editors and the poets. Following on from that last poem about time, I think we will need to wind up by 9 o'clock because we have run over a bit. So we have to think of our audience. So can everyone come on? Unmute, click on your videos, and we can all be together. Are we all here? Yes. So I think that Nathalie and Karen wanted to talk to the poets, and I can hand over to them, really.
Fantastic. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Oh, great. Oh, it was amazing to hear from everybody. And It felt exciting to hear new work. And, you know, it's always like when you're, I don't know, I mean, Nathalie, you know, that sort of sense of when you know a poet over time and then you hear new work developing and you hear new work developing in different ways and thinking about directions, thinking about themes that continue. Yeah, I found that so rewarding.
So I had a question for the poets. I think we've spoken quite a lot about the positive changes that have happened over the last decade, well, a bit more than a decade. I was wondering, and this includes you, Karen, as well, if anybody wanted to speak about what they think the biggest challenges are that remain to them as individual poets, negotiating the landscape, or in a more collective sense. Nick, I thought you might want to speak to this because you've set up the Obsidian Foundation, so you might want to kind of say something about that and the need that you think it speaks to.
I think the biggest challenge is just having, you know, it needs to be embedded into society, how that we are a part of that society. I think a lot of us, you know, if you asked us at the beginning of the process, we were very much the outsiders and we felt like outsiders and we were treated like outsiders. And not that we want to necessarily be the insiders, that doesn't just resolve it. I think it needs to be more a solution of how do you create an infrastructure that attracts a writer of color towards writing and longevity. I think there are many assumptions that writers, it's not a middle class pursuit. It's not just a middle class pursuit. So if money isn't your worry, if you don't have other concerns, it's very easy to be a writer and take your time and languagely perform and write and read, and you know. But if you don't, I think a lot of times they don't understand that. And then I think once you get published, it's about understanding how do you market this to an audience. If you just market it to the same audience that's always been reading, they will reject the work because it's not something that they're used to. I think you have to kind of train that audience, and as well encourage the audience from which these writers come from to think that, oh, there is something for me, oh, or this something that I haven't heard before is relevant. And I think those two things have to carry on together. Otherwise, what happens is you have a complete work system, and then 20 years down the line, we need to find another Nathalie Teitler to be able to make this happen again. We need to find another Neil Astley. We need to find another, you know, Malika Booker, and so on and so forth. And we're just repeating what we could have been building from. This should be the foundation of a much bigger platform of not just success, but longevity.
Nick, can I pick up very briefly on something that you said? I'm just going to throw a stat in because it was this idea around writing poetry not just being a middle class pursuit, and how the arts are, you know, kind of being increasingly deprived of funding. But can I just say that according, you know, the Society of Authors actually kind of do audits on writers' wages. And in 2006, the median author earnings were £12,330 per annum. And in 2022, the median had fallen to 7,000, a drop of 33.2% based on reported figures, which is from the members of the Society of Authors, or 60.2% when adjusted for inflation. So I just wanted to throw that into what you said, Nick, although you touched on a lot of other aspects, but there is a cold, hard reality behind that, and that as a statistic behind that. You know, the finances, it's serious, it's real, it affects accessibility in so many different ways.
Absolutely true. If nobody else wants to speak to that question, I'm really interested if you were speaking, a lot of you do speak to younger poets of color or poets of color who haven't published yet. What advice would you give them now?
I think for them to be able to create a space in which they can work within and be creative, with the complete works, that's what we achieve. But that had to be initiated. But I think for young, up and coming, emerging poets of colour, it's to create safe space in which they feel that their voices can be heard, and where they can step into that space and have their work critiqued in a more balanced way. I can say that from coming into the complete works, there wasn't that safe space for me. There wasn't that, it's very much fragmented. So I think for me, my advice would be creating some safe space and networking within that space as well.
Great advice, Denise. Anybody else?
I guess this idea of sort of community, there's something that sort of, you know, we began with the complete works in my case, and then we kind of replicate that and replicated it with, you know, with the Noble Soul and kind of the Latinx community. This idea that you are part of a group of people that, you know, that you share all these kind of ideas and problems and challenges and just, yeah, you're you know, it can start with a group of friends, but you know, in the case of the complete works, it really felt like a community where we kind of share that kind of time, you know, in retreats and workshops, and you can do that within your own sort of community and group of people. Yeah.
I'll say also,
Anyone?
I'll say
Sorry.
reading. Yeah, I'd say reading. One thing, I mean, we're all different here, but one thing we all share is a real passion for reading, and not just poetry, but all types of reading, you know, novels, you know, fiction. A lot of us here are naturally friends, but we also buddies, and we work on crafts, and we don't underestimate that. I think you can be, I think all of us here are talented to some extent, but actually what we've all improved on over time is our craft. And we take that quite seriously. You know, every time, if you ever catch any of us talking, we're talking about either craft or what we're reading or what other people are doing. So it's a passion. It's beyond just passion. It's we're trying to master something, and we're never, I want to say satisfied. It's not like it's a race, but we have an appetite for this reading and craft.
Yeah, I think I would add to that as well. I've been incredibly inspired by the way so many complete works poets work across art forms, and some of the extended family members as well. So moving into visual arts, Denise obviously also a visual artist, working in filmmaking, that kind of poetry play crossover that we've seen. So I think for a lot of younger poets and just poets in general, I think looking into sort of cross arts work is a really exciting thing to do, and a great way of kind of building new communities and new inspirations as well.
Can I ask something about focus? There are these other cross-genre projects that poets get involved in, but a lot of the poets also have other jobs. Will mentioned being a carer. We've just published Casey Hill, the James Berry Poetry Prize winner. She's a carer. There are a lot of poets doing other things in their lives, you know, to support themselves, or because they really believe in those areas and want to connect with them. And in some cases, it's what feeds their work. But with so many poets with different situations, it must be difficult to continue that focus on their work.
Yeah, I think it is a real challenge to keep writing, and maybe that's one of the challenges ahead. You know, it's, you can kind of, which I guess Nick was speaking to. You can create a community, but a community won't necessarily flourish over time unless it has unless there are the structural means to allow it to do so. I was thinking, and I guess I often think about poets of color in this country in relation to the US and how notable it is over there. It's their intergenerational spaces, and the work is enriched by that. You know, there's less of an expectation, a burden, you know, the like representation burden. You know, you're just, and the work is so, you know, it benefits from that, and it will only feel like something has been kind of achieved in this country when it's got to that state, and it still feels like it hasn't yet. It still feels kind of too soon to say. Like, I don't know how other people feel about that, because I mean, yeah, it's like Bernadine attests to, it was so recently in the 80s and 90s and early 90s where there was another like burst of, lots of small presses, lots of major presses publishing work by poets of color, and that was kind of swept away by the kind of reactionary impulse in the 90s and noughties.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of investment in America. They have the MFA programs that a lot of poets do. So that kind of supports them and builds them up. And they also have a lot of philanthropy. So there's a lot of money being invested into the arts through philanthropy. And one thing I think we all benefited from was just that, particularly the first cohort, is that we had 2 years. And those 2 years, I kid you not, I think many of us were at our wits' end with what we were doing, and and those 2 years felt like an oasis. But I think in America, that oasis is created quite regularly through MFA programs, fellowships that that writers can go on, and because there's such a larger number of people, a larger number of tutors, a larger number of publishers, there's so many more choices. I think here, I'm not saying it's scarce, but we need those structures, and hopefully over time that people are starting to take writers of color seriously. I mean, I've got every one of his books; they're all bangers, and they do not sound the same. I don't think any one of us sounds the same, which was another thing that works against us a lot of times. There's an assumption that we are of a common kind of story, but we're not.
Yeah. I wonder what people feel like they got from the complete works looking back, because now it feels like time has passed. Are there any like things that each of you remember or that you've taken forward?
I think it allowed me to create my own space, actually. Gave me confidence to explore trauma in different ways and to not be afraid to have a unique or different voice. I think that's what it gave me, especially having 2 years in which to have that support put in place. Definitely. I think also my poetics really allowed me to shape my poetics and understand what I was writing, how I was writing, and to whom I was writing to. And I think that's really important to have that embedded in your working practice.
In my case, the retreat that we had was so amazing. It was really wonderful. It was my first retreat, and I learned so much from those days that I remember thinking a lot about my practice and my poetics, and just sharing the space and the work with the group of poets and with Mimi Calvati and Pascal Petit, and thinking, I mean, the whole scheme is so amazing. I like to replicate this, and that's how I began sort of mentoring younger, in my case, Latinx or Latin American poets. So it was a way of kind of replicating that system and taking it, forward. And I'm still doing it. So in a way, it was the kind of the seed that was planted in me, and sort of it created all this kind of ideas, and it really inspired me to kind of help others and mentor other people and sort of work with other poets and build bridges. We're doing lots of projects with US Latinx poets as well, sort of, which is wonderful. And it's something really that began with the complete works, with the ideas behind the scheme. So yeah, it was really, really amazing.
Yeah, well, that's what Bernadine was talking about ripples, wasn't it? That so many things have come through the complete works and have rippled outwards and have inspired other things. Well, it's been a wonderful gathering of poets tonight, and we need to draw it to an end now. So I'd like to thank Nathalie Teitler and Karen McCarthy Woolf for editing Mapping the Future. And I'd like to thank Leo, and Edward and Will and Denise and Nick for their great readings, and also all the poets we had on video, which was a lovely range, I think, to add to tonight's event. So thank you all very much. Thank you.